The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of Route 66, just outside Flagstaff. It was the kind of heat that made mirages dance on the horizon and turned car hoods into griddles. At the intersection of Milton Road and Route 66, where a faded stoplight swayed in the hot breeze, a small figure crouched in the shade of a shuttered gas station. His name was Marcus Webb, though most people at St. Catherine's Home for Boys just called him Mark. 14 years old, rail-thin, with sun-bleached brown hair that stuck up in all directions and a face full of freckles that made him look younger than he was. His clothes were donated 2 sizes too big, and his sneakers had holes in both soles. But his eyes, those green eyes, held something that poverty couldn't touch. A stubborn spark of defiance mixed with an aching loneliness. Marcus had been at St. Catherine's since he was 6. No memories of parents, no relatives who wanted him, no fairy tale ending where someone came to claim him. Just 8 years of gray institutional walls, lumpy mattresses, and the knowledge that every birthday brought him 1 year closer to aging out of the system with nothing and nobody. That afternoon, he'd run away. Not for the first time, but this time felt different. This time, he'd sworn he wouldn't go back. The new director, Mr. Hendricks, had a heavy hand and a mean streak. Marcus's ribs still ached from last week's punishment for breaking curfew. He'd rather take his chances on the streets. He was counting the last of his money, $7.32 saved from odd jobs, when the rumble started. It began as a distant thunder, then grew into a earth-shaking roar that made his chest vibrate. Marcus looked up to see a lone motorcycle pulling up to the red light. The bike was gorgeous, a custom Harley-Davidson with chrome that gleamed like liquid silver in the sunlight. Intricate flames were airbrushed along the tank in shades of orange and crimson. But it was the rider who commanded attention. He was massive, easily 6'4", with a gray beard that reached mid-chest and arms covered in elaborate tattoos. A leather vest displayed the unmistakable colors. Hell's Angels, Arizona chapter. The skull and wings emblem seemed to stare directly at Marcus. The biker's name was Thomas "Bull" Richardson, a name that carried weight in biker circles from Phoenix to Las Vegas. At 58, he'd been riding with the Angels for 34 years. His hands, scarred and weathered, rested easy on the handlebars. He'd seen it all. Bar fights, desert runs, brotherhood that ran deeper than blood. But today, he was just enjoying the ride to a chapter meeting in Flagstaff, letting the road clear his mind. Bull never saw them coming. 2 figures emerged from behind the abandoned gas station, moving fast and purposeful. The first was lanky, maybe 19, with a spider web tattoo crawling up his neck. The second was shorter, stockier, with wild eyes that screamed methamphetamine. They'd been watching the intersection for hours, waiting for the right mark. Spider Webb reached Bull first, grabbing his shoulder while his partner moved for the saddlebag. Bull started to react, his instincts honed from decades of rough living kicking in, but Spider Webb had a knife, a cheap gas station blade that caught the light as it appeared in his hand. "Give us the bag, old man," Spider Webb hissed, pressing the blade against Bull's leather vest. "Nice and easy, and nobody gets hurt." Marcus watched from his hiding spot, his heart hammering against his ribs. He should stay hidden. He should let it happen. These weren't his problems. He had his own survival to worry about. Getting involved meant trouble, maybe the police, maybe worse. Every instinct screamed at him to stay down. Stay quiet. Stay invisible like he'd learned to do at St. Catherine's. But something in him refused. Maybe it was the way Bull's jaw tightened. The flash of anger mixed with calculation in the older man's eyes. Maybe it was the cowardice of 2 young punks going after someone just because they thought they could. Maybe Marcus was just tired of watching bad things happen to people who didn't deserve it. Maybe, in some deep place he couldn't name, he was tired of being powerless. Marcus's hand closed around a broken chunk of concrete, a piece of the station's crumbling foundation. It was heavy, rough, real. Before his brain could catch up with his body, before fear could freeze him in place, he was moving. He ran toward the stoplight, his worn sneakers slapping against the hot pavement, and he was screaming, some wordless yell that came from his gut, from all those years of swallowed anger and hurt. Spider Webb turned at the sound, confusion crossing his face, And that moment of distraction was all Bull needed. Bull's elbow connected with Spiderweb's jaw in a motion smooth as silk, decades of bar fights compressed into one perfect strike. The knife clattered to the pavement as Spiderweb stumbled backward, but his partner was already reaching into his waistband. Marcus saw the gun before Bull did. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. Marcus hurled the concrete chunk with everything he had. It struck the stocky man's wrist just as his finger found the trigger. The gun went off, the crack splitting the desert air, the bullet ricocheting off the pavement and into the empty sky. The weapon fell, skittering under Bull's bike. Then everything happened fast. Spiderweb recovered, lunging not for Bull but for Marcus. His hands found the boy's shirt, lifting him off his feet with surprising strength. Marcus felt his back slam against the hot metal of a street sign pole. The air knocked from his lungs. "You little piece of trash," Spiderweb snarled, his breath sour and hot against Marcus's face. "You just made the biggest mistake of your worthless life." Marcus tried to fight back, his fists connecting with nothing but air. He was 14, barely 100 pounds. Spiderweb was holding him with one hand now, the other pulled back for a punch. Marcus could see the ring on the man's finger, thick and silver, and knew it would split his face open. The punch never landed. Bull was there, moving faster than a man his size had any right to move. He grabbed Spiderweb by the back of his shirt and yanked him away from Marcus like he weighed nothing. The boy dropped to the ground, gasping, his vision spotted with black dots. Through the haze, he watched Bull plant his boot in Spiderweb's chest, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The stocky man was running now, abandoning his partner, disappearing into the maze of abandoned buildings that lined this forgotten stretch of Route 66. Spiderweb scrambled to his feet and followed, limping, shooting one last venomous look at Marcus before vanishing around a corner. Bull stood in the middle of the intersection, chest heaving, as the stoplight finally changed to green. No cars waited. This stretch of old Route 66 saw maybe a dozen vehicles a day since the interstate went in. Just desert, heat, and ghosts of America's past. He turned to Marcus, who was still on the ground, back pressed against the pole, trying to breathe normally. The boy's shirt was torn. His lip was bleeding from where it had split against the metal, and his eyes were wide with shock and fear. The biker walked over slowly, deliberately, his boots crunching on broken glass. He stood over Marcus, blocking out the sun, his shadow falling across the boy like a judgment. For a long moment, he just stared, his expression unreadable behind that gray beard. "No," Sophia said firmly. "Connecticut estate law requires probate oversight for estates over $5 million. This document bypasses every protection designed to prevent fraud." She turned to look at Richard, whose face had turned crimson with rage. "They're not giving your nephew his inheritance, Mr. Whitmore. They're stealing it. All of it." Richard moved toward Sophia with such violence that Maria screamed. "You little immigrant trash. Do you have any idea what you've just done? I'll have you and your mother deported. I'll destroy both of you." Harrison's fist came down on the desk with surprising force for a man his age. "Enough." The single word cut through Richard's threats like a blade. The room froze. Harrison stood slowly, his body straightening with a dignity that had been absent for months, as if Sophia's courage had rekindled something long dormant in his spirit. "Richard, when was the last time you asked me how I was feeling? Not how I was doing with my assets, not about my health in terms of my ability to sign documents. When did you last ask about me as a person?" Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Uncle Harrison, and you, Thomas. 30 years you've worked for me. 30 years of Christmas bonuses, of trust, of friendship. Or so I thought." Harrison picked up the document, his hands no longer trembling. "How much were they paying you? How much was my life worth to you?" Thomas said nothing, but the color drained from his face. Harrison turned to Sophia, and for the first time in years, there was fire in his pale blue eyes. "You risked everything to tell me the truth. Why?" Sophia met his gaze without flinching. "Because my mother taught me that staying silent makes you complicit. Because you've treated us with more respect in 12 years than your own family has shown you in a lifetime. Because it was the right thing to do. Maria began to cry softly, pride and terror mixing in her tears. Harrison nodded slowly, then looked at the three men who had tried to rob him. Get out of my house. All of you. Thomas, you're fired. Marcus, our business relationship is terminated effective immediately. And Richard, you're no longer welcome here. Ever. You can't do this, Richard sputtered. You need us. You're old, you're confused. We'll have you declared incompetent. Try it, Harrison said coldly. I'll have every document these two criminals prepared examined by the State Attorney General. I suspect Sophia here has only scratched the surface of your fraud. The three men left like rats abandoning a sinking ship, their threats echoing down the marble hallways until the front door slammed behind them. Harrison turned to Sophia and Maria, both still standing near the doorway, uncertain of what came next. Maria, Sophia, please sit down. We have much to discuss. If you're moved by Sophia's courage to speak truth to power, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the most important voices come from the most unexpected places, and this story is just beginning to unfold. Harrison walked to the window, looking out at the rain that was finally beginning to ease. Then he turned back to face them, and there was something new in his expression, something that looked remarkably like hope. The next morning, Harrison sat in his study with a new lawyer, Catherine Chun, a sharp woman in her 50s who came highly recommended by the Connecticut Bar Association. Sophia sat beside him, her community college textbooks spread across the coffee table, while Maria brought in fresh coffee and pastries. Miss Rodriguez, Catherine said, looking at Sophia with professional respect, your analysis was remarkably accurate. I've reviewed the documents Thomas prepared. If Mr. Whitmore had signed, he would have lost everything within 60 days. The offshore accounts were set up to funnel the money through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. She paused, her expression grave. You saved this man's life savings. Harrison reached over and squeezed Sophia's hand. What you did took more courage than anything I've done in my entire career. You had everything to lose and nothing to gain. Sophia shook her head. That's not true, sir. I gained the knowledge that I did the right thing. That's worth more than anything. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened in the Whitmore mansion. Harrison began teaching Sophia about business, really teaching her. They spent hours in his study, going through case files from his company's history, discussing strategy, ethics, leadership. He saw in her something he had never found in his own family. Genuine curiosity, moral courage, and raw intelligence waiting to be refined. Maria watched her daughter blossom under Harrison's mentorship. The old man seemed to grow younger with each passing day, his purpose renewed. He started eating better, walking in the garden, even laughing at dinner. One evening, as autumn turned to winter, Harrison called them both into his study. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting warm shadows across the room. I've made a decision, he announced. Sophia, I want to pay for you to finish your degree at Yale. Full scholarship, room and board, everything. You have the mind for law, for business. You shouldn't be wasting it at community college while working 2 jobs. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Whitmore, I can't accept that. It's too much. You can and you will. But there's a condition. Harrison smiled, the first genuine smile Maria had seen on his face in years. You have to promise me you'll use that education to help people who can't speak for themselves. People like your mother, who work in the shadows and never ask for recognition. I promise, Sophia whispered. And Maria, Harrison continued, turning to her mother. You've cared for me like family. Better than family. I'm increasing your salary, and I'm setting up a trust fund for your retirement. You'll never have to worry about money again. Maria couldn't speak. She simply crossed herself and mouthed a silent prayer of gratitude. Spring arrived in Greenwich with an explosion of cherry blossoms and new beginnings. Sophia had been accepted to Yale Law School with Harrison's recommendation letter carrying weight that opened doors she never knew existed. But before she could start, there was unfinished business to address. Catherine Chun sat across from Harrison in his study, a satisfied smile on her face. The investigation is complete. Thomas Blackwell has been disbarred and is facing criminal charges for fraud and elder exploitation. Marcus Sterling's financial advisory license has been revoked. And Richard, she paused significantly, Richard is being investigated by the IRS for tax evasion unrelated to your case. It seems your situation wasn't his first attempt at creative inheritance planning. Harrison nodded slowly. Good. They won't be able to hurt anyone else. But Catherine wasn't finished. There's more. We traced the offshore accounts. They had already siphoned over $2 million from your portfolio over the past 18 months through falsified investment reports. If Sophia hadn't stopped you from signing, you would have been left with virtually nothing within a year. The room fell silent as the magnitude of the betrayal settled over them. Maria, who had been arranging flowers by the window, crossed herself again. How did I not see it? Harrison asked quietly. How did I become so blind? Good. Jax's weathered face broke into a slight smile. Means you're smart. He turned to address the crowd. Bull's right. This kid showed heart today. Real heart. Not the kind you can fake or learn. The kind you either have or you don't. He looked back at Marcus. We've got mechanics in this chapter. Teachers. A nurse. Even a lawyer, though we don't talk about that much. Laughter rippled through the assembled bikers. Point is, Jax continued, we take care of our own. And if Bull says you're worth taking care of, that's good enough for me. He extended his hand. Welcome to the family, Marcus Webb. Marcus took the hand, shaking it, and suddenly the crowd erupted. Bikers surged forward, not threatening but welcoming, patting his back, ruffling his hair, offering words of encouragement and acceptance. It was overwhelming, dizzying, more human contact and positive attention than Marcus had received in years. A woman with short gray hair and kind eyes introduced herself as Diana, said she ran a diner in Flagstaff and could always use help. A younger biker named Tommy offered to teach him basic motorcycle maintenance. An older man with tribal tattoos covering his arms said he had a spare room and wouldn't mind the company. Bull watched it all with satisfaction. His massive arms crossed over his chest. The boy who had saved his life was being saved in return, pulled from the edge of a cliff he'd been standing on for too long. 3 years later, the Arizona sun still beat down on Route 66. But the abandoned gas station at Milton Road was abandoned no more. Fresh paint covered the walls, new pumps stood where rust had been, and a sign hung above the door. Webb's Garage and Cycle Shop. Marcus, now 17, stood in the bay working on a custom Harley, his hands sure and confident as they moved over the engine. He'd grown 6 inches, filled out with muscle earned from honest work and regular meals. His hair was longer now, pulled back in a small ponytail, and a leather vest hung on a hook nearby, not with full colors yet, but with a prospect patch that marked him as family in training. The door chimed and Bull walked in, gray beard now more white than gray, but still as imposing as ever. He watched Marcus work for a moment, pride evident in his eyes. College acceptance letter came today, Bull said, holding up an envelope. Northern Arizona University. Full scholarship. Mechanical engineering. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, a smile breaking across his face. The same face that had been so hollow and haunted 3 years ago now radiated confidence and purpose. Never thought I'd be the kind of kid who goes to college, Marcus said, taking the letter. You're not just any kind of kid. Bull clapped him on the shoulder. You're our kid. Through the garage window, Marcus could see the intersection where his life had changed, where a moment of courage had led to a family he never knew he needed. The Hells Angels had kept their promise. Diana had given him a job and taught him responsibility. Tommy had taught him mechanics. Jax's wife, a retired teacher, had tutored him until his grades went from failing to honor roll. And Bull had given him something more precious than anything. A father figure who showed up, who stayed, who cared. St. Catherine's had tried to retrieve him at first, but the Angels had lawyers too, good ones. Emancipation papers were filed. A stable home environment was demonstrated. And in the end, the system that had failed Marcus for so long simply let him go. The roar of motorcycles announced the arrival of the Sunday ride crew. Dozens of bikes pulled into the lot, the weekly tradition that Marcus now joined whenever he could. Brothers and sisters of the road. A family bound not by blood but by something stronger. Choice, loyalty, and love. Marcus pulled on his vest and headed for his own bike. A rebuilt Sportster he'd restored himself. Bull's first major project assigned to him. As he kick-started the engine and felt that familiar rumble, he thought about that scared 14-year-old kid who'd thrown a chunk of concrete and changed everything. Sometimes courage looks like fighting. Sometimes it looks like running toward danger when every instinct screams to run away. And sometimes, Marcus had learned, courage looks like accepting help when you've spent your whole life believing you didn't deserve it. The engines roared to life, and the family rode together into the Arizona sunset, a river of chrome and leather and belonging that stretched as far as the eye could see.